Have you ever wondered what it would be like if you could rewrite Korean history, especially after the Korean War? Well, if so, then today's book just might be for you. I'll be reviewing Same Bed, Different Dreams by Ed Park. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're looking at another one of the finalists for the Pulitzer Prize in fiction. As I've said before, I try to read all of the finalists and winners. However, the bulk of them are nonfiction, so I only get to take a look at 3 fiction books. I will say that one of the defining features about this book is it's really complicated. It starts out relatively easy to understand. You meet the main character, well, at least who seems to be the main character, and he is a researcher, and he is involved in some kind of development of, we'll say, artificial intelligence. Think a really smart Alexa or something along those lines. He used to be an author, and so he finds himself very much embedded in a crowd of other authors, and so he finds himself still being brought into a literary crowd, even though he himself is growing increasingly distant to that crowd. That is how the novel starts. But then you get a weird little development when suddenly you're told about these different dreams. And at least that's what they're titled as in the books. And each dream is starting to tell you a little bit of Korean history, yet it's a little hard to say because I'm not an expert on Korean history, but you know that it's not entirely accurate. It's a slight rewriting of Korean history. And so as you're going through this book, you're getting some Korean history, but without going and doing a whole bunch of additional research. I'm not entirely sure what parts of it is completely accurate and then what parts of it is the added part of this book, which is this idea of creating some kind of alternative Korean history. And then you, of course, are also brought into the present with the main character, June Park, the former author slash scientist. There's a couple other characters that you need to know about. For example, the whole retelling of the Korean history is mostly done through an individual named Yong-ae. This is actually the person with whom June Park is working, trying to figure out some information, and this is the retelling of Korean history is done through him. But you also have a couple other characters. You have a contemporary character with June, Hannah Lee. She is a contemporary living in the United States, but trying to figure out her identity, especially being a Korean American, and just trying to figure out what community she belongs to. And then there's another elderly gentleman, Mr. Kim, who June is working with, trying to, again, his research and trying to figure out exactly this history that is being told. It's kind of hard to give much of a synopsis aside from telling you who those main characters are, especially since the history that's being told through the dreams, I would say that those are the primary purposes of the book. And as you get deeper into the book, it clearly becomes a little more experimental. And as you get to the end of the book, you will suddenly find out much more about what the purpose of these dreams are and what all of June's research is trying to get to, as well as Hannah's experience. So I don't want to give away too much about that, but I do want to look at some of the broad themes that the book is dealing with and why it would choose to address the Korean War and this idea of rewriting some of the history of Korea, especially Korean-American relationships, but also Korea's relationship with Japan, China, and just its place in the world, at least since the beginning of the 20th century, clear through the Korean War and up to the present. Probably the most obvious theme that's being traced throughout this whole book is this idea of culture and identity. Like I said, the main character, June, his whole identity of being an author and also being a scientist, but then the crowd that he hangs out with and just the terms he uses and the ideas that he is constantly referencing, it's clear that he is still trying to find himself in terms of being a Korean American. What does that mean? It's clearly in his mind something distinct. It is not just a Korean that happens to live in America or an American that has a Korean ancestry. It is someone that is part of a particular community, and he is trying to sort that out, and he's trying to figure out where he fits into it. And it is a big part of why he feels it's important to do his research that is leading him to meet all these individuals. Of course, his research and the people that you are engaging with and getting to know brings another big theme in this book, and that's this idea of memory and erasure. Because when it comes to particularly traumatic events like the Korean War, but even before the Korean War in Korea, you had the Japanese colonization of Korea and the treatment of the Japanese towards the Koreans, and even before that, just the bringing in of Western thoughts and Korea's place in the world meant that there was a lot going on in Korea that gave it a lot of painful memories and a lot of painful experiences, and in some cases a lot of growing pains. And so there is a deliberate effort at trying to forget these hard things, or trying to find a way to use these difficult memories in some way to strengthen your identity, whether that's a national identity, socially chosen or socially imposed identity. Since the telling of this story is done through all these different manners, you have June doing his research, you have Hannah who is just trying to find her way in life, then you have these two individuals whose experiences are what is being researched, and they are the people that had firsthand experience of it. And of course, that element of these flashbacks being dreams, all of that is meant to show the interconnectedness of lives, especially since initially you don't see that interconnectedness. But as the book progresses, you start to see how it comes together. And I think that again really plays into the importance of identity, because it's this opportunity where something very removed by time and location, because of course, when you're looking at the history of Korea and you're in Korea and it's decades, if not a whole century before what's going on with the main person in June, there is still a connectivity that makes it important for understanding someone's identity in some shape, way, or form. I would say there are a lot of strengths to this book that I would encourage people to read it for. The first one being that it's a really richly layered narrative, and I enjoyed that for the most part. It does become a little complicated at times because you can forget when you jump from one person to another, and you might forget, oh, what exactly do I need to know from this narrative, or why did I jump to this narrative? And I would say that it can be a little bit of a challenge of not knowing how much of the history is real and how much they're tweaking just a little bit. All of the little anecdotes that they share, I felt like those were probably real. Those they were good little anecdotes for the most part, and I would think maybe that is a true story, but again, I don't know. So anything that I learned about Korean history coming from this, I would be reticent to share if I didn't first go and confirm it myself. It gives these characters an incredibly rich history and development. I think that is one of the greatest strengths from this book, as you are tracing not just the history of Korea, but as this individual is doing his research, and as the book is coming together, and as you're starting to get a better understanding of what the whole purpose of the book is, you have a great appreciation for how well the characters are developed, and how the stories are playing on each other in a way that you weren't really expecting, or you didn't fully understand. So for that reason, I would say that it is definitely a very emotionally resonant story. And I would strongly encourage individuals that want to engage with these questions of identity, this emotional connection, even when quite distant geographically and temporally. I would say that all of these things still make it a very compelling book to read. Biggest challenge when it comes to this book is fully understanding where you are at each stage of the book and knowing if you are taking in the right bits of information. So I would say this book is for anyone that is looking for a book on identity, or looking to engage with questions of how we create our past and how we engage with our past. Who wouldn't I say this book is for? Well, like I said, if you're going to have a problem with the fact that a good deal of the history is made up, or at least some of it is made up enough to make it challenging to repeat anything from the history that you read, the fact that it's a rewritten history, which means you know parts of it are not true, but not knowing which parts could make it even more frustrating, those could be reasons why you may not be interested. Admittedly, it can also be hard to follow. It may not be for anyone that thinks that the challenge of following it and understanding the pacing and understanding what's going on is going to put you off from reading this book. Then I wouldn't recommend this book for you either. Since I haven't read all of the Pulitzer Prize books for fiction, then I'm not going to say whether I think this is my favorite of the three or not, so I'll hold off on that judgment until I've read the other two. But I will say that I think that there's definitely something to get out of this book if you're willing to engage with the main things that it brings to the table. But I could also see why it would be a challenge for a lot of people that want a more traditional novel, a more traditional plot structure, and they're just not interested in engaging with experimental elements of writing, which are certainly here. But I am very much interested in what other people have to say about this book. So please let me know in the comments what your thought on this book individually is. And if you have read the other books that have been nominated and won for the Pulitzer Prize in fiction, please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.